stop trying to learn faster. Instead, learn more efficiently. And if you don't know the difference between those two things, that might be why you are struggling to get the grades that you want. There is so much productivity and studying advice out here on YouTube, and I very rarely see anyone talking about the difference. In this video, I'm going to give you a very simple two-step framework to improve your grades by becoming a more efficient learner rather than a faster learner. And at the end of the video, I'll give you my golden rule on when you should definitely not try to get faster. If you are new to this channel, welcome. I'm Dr. Justin Sung. I'm a full-time learning coach and the head of learning at I Can Study. I'm also a former medical doctor, and for the last decade, I have worked with thousands of learners from around the world to help them learn more efficiently. So let's start with why trying to be a fast learner can actually make you worse at learning. One of the first things that I started learning back when I was in high school, entering into uni, was speed reading. And my thinking was very, very simple. If I can read at like 300 words per minute right now, if I can double that to 600, then I have doubled my learning speed. And so I installed this app on Windows that taught me all these things like sub-vocalization and the grouping and the skimming and like eye training drills. And after about a month of training, like an hour or so, a couple hours every day, I managed to get my words per minute up to like over 1,000 with 90% retention and comprehension. And so I thought, damn, I'm unstoppable now. Now, about 2 months later, I started my first year of uni, which was the competitive pre-med year to enter into medical school. And as many of you know how that story played out if you've watched my other videos, I had to study a lot. Like I was studying my crazy 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so one thing I realized, which is very obvious to me now, is that learning to read faster didn't really improve my learning speed by that much. By tripling my reading speed, my actual learning speed probably only increased by like 5%. And that's because even though I technically had a high retention and comprehension, like over 90%, it's not real. It was based on these simple fact recall assessments that were done like 30 seconds after I'd finished reading a very isolated passage of text. And none of that is realistic. In reality, we're reading large volumes of information over hours, and we need to use that information beyond just simple fact recall, and we need to retain it not just for like 30 seconds, but for days or even weeks. And so my bottleneck was not in how fast I could read and consume information, it was how I was processing the information in my brain once I'd consumed it. All I'd done by increasing my reading speed was make it so that I was trying to drink out of a fire hose. And here's why the story is relevant to you. Even though reading speed is a technique that I was working on, this would have been the same for any other technique. Fundamentally, the problem was that I believed that I could get better by doing the same thing but faster. Knowing what I know now about how learning works, that is completely flawed. In fact, it's actually worse than flawed, it's actually harmful. It's harmful because it takes away your focus on working on things that would have actually made a bigger difference. It entrenches existing habits that aren't really serving you anymore, and it increases the errors that you make. And those errors in your learning, you then have to spend more time to just fix them later. And the problem with just trying to study faster using the same method becomes really obvious when you think about it like this. Do you actively try to think more slowly normally? Like, are you deliberately studying there and being like, today, I'm just gonna hit a casual 60%. Like, I know I could think about this faster. I know I could just process the information better, but today, I'm just gonna take it easy and only work at like half my capacity. Most people, most of the time, are thinking at a speed that is fairly optimum for what they can do with that method without increasing errors. So whether it is reading or it is the way that we are writing notes or typing notes or whatever it is, the problem is not how fast we are doing it, it is just how we are doing it. If the machine is broken, when you crank up the machine to make it faster, you're just increasing more errors that you gotta fix later. And I see a really common example of this with like AI these days, where people are like, hey, you can use this app to, it like types out all of your notes for you. You just take the recording from a lecture and then it just pumps out like magically these notes. You're done, your studying is done, you don't have to study ever again, you're gonna be amazing. Like, yeah, you've got notes, but it doesn't mean you learned anything. And people like rave about these apps. They're like, oh, it saves me so much time. That's the equivalent of like a robot that says they're gonna go work out for you. And now you're like, oh, I've saved so much time because I don't have to waste time at the gym anymore. My robot is lifting the weights for me. It's like, congratulations, you won the prize for missing the point. And that is exactly the type of thinking that I had when I was going through uni for the first few years. I was just focused on like speed, just being faster, just saving time. That's all that mattered. Which is why it's no wonder that by the end of like literally my first month of university, I was already starting to feel overwhelmed. And like the more I tried, the more I was falling behind. I could just never keep up. And despite like studying even more to make up for that, which is ironic, I still wasn't walking into the exams feeling confident. So if that sounds like you, then this is what you should do. This is what I wish I had done a lot earlier. Actually measure your retention and understanding properly. Do this. Don't worry so much about how long it takes to study something. Pick something, study it for 2 or 3 hours. Use whatever method you feel like comfortable with. And at the end of the session, create a little test for yourself. 15 questions. 5 of these questions should be low level. Fact recall, definitions, explaining processes and concepts, isolated. 5 of these questions should be mid-level, applying it to a simple problem to solve or combining 2 concepts together to see how they're related to each other. Like, how does one thing affect this other thing? And then 5 of them should be high level. These are usually going to be like short answer or like mini essay type questions where you're taking at least 3 different concepts and you're saying, yes, they're related to each other. Explain how they're related, but also let's talk about the impact or the significance of that relationship. If you change one thing, how does it affect everything else? So now you've got 15 like test questions that you've made yourself. 1 week later, test your retention and understanding by doing that test. Do it purely based on memory. Do not review your notes beforehand. Since you're probably not gonna have an answer sheet for this, you can check whether your answers make sense at the end of the test by looking at your notes, looking things up, asking someone, asking a teacher, asking a lecturer. For the high level questions, you're not really gonna know whether it was like a correct answer or not, but you'll generally get a sense for whether it made sense and whether it was like a good answer or you missed a few things as you're exploring and learning more about the topic. Now that in itself is actually a very, very effective and powerful revision technique. And once you do it, you're probably gonna start doing it regularly, like forever, because it's just so good. Even without the answer sheet, like trying to figure out if you got the right answer is incredibly beneficial learning. But the added benefit is that it gives you an accurate representation of how good your methods really are. You'll be able to see the retention you have for low level, mid level, and higher level. And you'll be able to see your ability to actually tackle those different levels of questions. Generally speaking, if you get over 90%, I'd say that's great. That's really, really good. 80% and over, still pretty good. 70% and over, it's acceptable. Less than 70%, probably something in your methods can be optimized. It doesn't mean that everything that you're doing is bad. It just means that there are some parts of the way that you're studying that aren't really serving you anymore for this type of content, for that level of challenge. And so now we have some real data on how effective our learning methods actually are. And you might find that it's better for some subjects and worse for other subjects, but when you continue to do this, you get a really good idea about whether your methods are actually serving you or not. Armed with this data, we can then move on to step 2 of the framework. So just to reiterate, the problem with step 1 was thinking that we can get better just by doing the same thing but faster. And the second problem is that trying to learn faster often makes us skip the part of learning that is the most beneficial while spending more time on the thing that doesn't help. It reduces the value you're getting for the time that you're spending. It actually lowers your efficiency. And instead of just explaining it to you myself, here's an email that I recently got that explains it perfectly. I kid you not, I received this email literally yesterday morning while I was planning this video. So here it is. As you can see, it's a little long, but if we focus in on this sentence, I think it sums it up perfectly, where it says, I realized I was so fixated on trying to finish all my content as quickly as possible that I was avoiding actually processing the parts of the topic I felt were difficult. And then later on, they went on to say they tried to push through and they thought about it patiently, like a detective trying to solve a case instead of a chore that I had to do. And I really like the way that they put it. In fact, I might use that analogy in the future. A lot of the time when we're focused on trying to go faster, and I felt this a lot, is that anything that makes us slow down is perceived as bad. It feels like it's making us less efficient. But actually, the reality is that real efficiency is about knowing when it's worth slowing down. It's understanding that sometimes you actually have to let your brain sit and think about it. And the reason I like that detective analogy is because a detective's job is to solve the case. They're looking at these clues and they're trying to piece the puzzle together and figure it out. That's their job. They're not thinking about it like, oh yep, I looked at the clues, yep, I tried my best, I couldn't really figure anything out, couldn't solve the case, but that's that task ticked off the list. Oops, couldn't catch the criminal, better luck next time. That's not how they're doing it, probably, I hope. There's a commitment to figuring it out. They're determined to see the pattern even when it's not obvious. And that takes time. You can't just rush your brain to see that pattern just by like forcing it to like see patterns harder. Like I'm pretty sure cases don't get solved like in animes where, you know, like the detective is like, what's the missing clue? Like what's the solution? And then someone's like, think about it. We're running out of time. Think harder. And they have this like flashback montage of all these things that they saw over the last few months. Like the woman's ring, she was wearing it on her left hand. Or the door, it had a smudge on the left side of the doorknob. The gun, it was angled 15 degrees clockwise. The pieces, they're connecting together. Ah, I know the solution. Like, I don't think that that happens. You know those scenes that I'm talking about? That's literally never, ever happened to me in my entire life. No, in real life, learning requires making connections and deciding which connections are worth keeping and which ones are not as important. That all takes time and just patience. And because that takes time, if you try to rush it, you're actually gonna miss out on making those connections that directly create better memory and understanding, aka the actual learning is being skipped. And what we end up doing is we spend more time on just consuming information and maybe documenting information and less time on actually learning it in the first place. On the other hand, if you know which parts are worth slowing down for, the value you get per hour you spend increases. Your efficiency actually improves by strategically slowing down. You get slower at covering content and reading words, but you get faster at building knowledge. See the difference? So after you did step 1, here's what you can do with step 2. Start by watching another one of my videos. And this is not like just one of those sneaky kind of like this video, like plug type things. I'm actually serious. Yeah, I appreciate the extra views, but I have a lot of other videos where I talk about different techniques. And most of the time I'm creating those videos with an audience in mind that doesn't have a lot of like training and like advanced learning strategies. Like these are things that I think most people can kind of pick up and start running with. So watch a video. If you want one to start with, I think the non-linear note-taking video is probably a good place to start. I'll put a link to that in the description and try to integrate that into your method. You don't have to like change everything. Even if you just take a few parts of it and then integrate it and change your method, just whatever's comfortable for you. Study the same thing again, another 2 or 3 hours, and do the same process. Test yourself. And after you do this a few rounds, you'll start noticing how making small changes in your methods affects your attention and your understanding. And you'll realize how by changing how you are going about learning, you can increase your overall efficiency, not by being faster, but by getting more out of the time that you're putting in. Which brings me to my golden rule that I promised you at the beginning. If you feel like you need to study faster to keep up, it almost always means you really need to figure out where to slow down. Feeling like you need to speed up probably means that you are falling behind. It means that what you're doing now isn't enough. In other words, this is a sign that your current methods are leaking effort and time. And therefore you're not getting enough value out of the time that you're currently spending. And so it's true, it's not about spending more time if you've got limited time, but the answer isn't getting faster, it's figuring out which parts are wasting and leaking time. Remember, doing the same thing but faster only amplifies your errors, which is actually gonna make you more stressed, which may be something that you have directly felt multiple times, where you felt like what you weren't doing right now was enough, and then you tried to be faster or you did more of it, and you actually ended up with more problems to deal with, more stress, more anxiety, more uncertainty. If you feel the need for speed, the answer is to keep making changes to your methods until that feeling goes away. And this can take a little bit of time. Some people might be hesitant about spending time when they feel like they're running out of time, but trust me, just trying to go faster is a dead end. It's a dead end that I have gone down many, many, many times before, and I can tell you, there's nothing waiting there for you. Like at the end of that, you're gonna have to do a U-turn and get back out again anyway. Now, for me, the way that I learn now, I feel mentally much less rushed than I used to feel when I was in my first year of university. And my learning efficiency is like 3-4 times greater than it was back then. I know what I need to do. I have a systematic way of building knowledge, and I know exactly what I'm gonna get out of the time that I'm spending. It gives me a lot of confidence, it gives me a lot of control. For me, it took me years to get to this point, but hopefully by sharing some of the things that I've learned along the way, it's gonna take a little less time for you. Now, if you do want a head start on this to figure it out a little bit more easily, then you may be interested in joining my program at icanstudy.com, which is my over decade of personal and professional experience helping people learn more efficiently, packed into a step-by-step program. Everything that I've talked about in this video and everything that I've talked about in almost every single other one of my videos has been distilled down into this step-by-step program. So if you're interested, you can check that out. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.